Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we are going to take a look at this picture I did in my sketchbook for Sketchbook Sunday, and I kind of want to call this a series of unfortunate events. Sometimes that happens. They don't all come out perfect, and you're going to see a lot of bad decisions here, and how I overcame some problems that I encountered, and hopefully it'll help you come up with some solutions in your artwork as you're working through your sketchbook if you also make bad choices from time to time. I started off with a fairly decent sketch of these bell flowers, and I took this photo in my sister's garden on Sunday, and I took the photo around 6:30 p.m. so the sun was low in the sky, and the photo showed the flowers just beautifully backlit, and I just really liked the way that picture came out. I'm not a fan of drawing like flowers that are smaller. I usually like larger petaled flowers where I can kind of spend time on the petals because they're really big, but I just really like the way these bells came out. And I think part of the thing I liked about the picture was the backlit aspect, but for whatever reason, I think because I'm working in my sketchbook, it's the Fabriano Venice book, and it's not a terribly robust paper. It's fine for a couple layers as long as you're not scrubbing or getting it too wet or doing anything too crazy. But if you're going to do like negative painting, lots of layers, things like that, it does tend to want to pill and warp. So I guess originally thought that I would just do really pale washes of watercolor and do kind of like more of a botanical approach. The couple problems with that though, with how I've started. The first problem is that I did not do a detailed enough sketch. The second problem is I'm looking at the photo on my phone instead of either printing it out on a piece of paper from my printer or bringing it up on my computer screen. I didn't want to be bothered by either of that. My computer was in the other room. I didn't want to bring it in here, and I didn't want to waste the paper to print it out. So I often find that when I go wrong with a picture, it's because I am being too lazy to do what I know I need to do if I'm going to attack a certain style, like a botanical style. So there's problem number one. I do like the colors that I'm using here. I'm using some of the Jane Davenport paints, and I thought they would be perfect for this because they're so vibrant and transparent, and especially the brights are really bright and vibrant. And I knew I could water them down and just have really delicate layers, but didn't end up working out because I wasn't committed to doing a dark background, and I think for those colors to look light and bright and luminous, I was going to need that dark background, which I didn't think this paper could handle. At this point, I'm pretty much thinking of doing a layer in watercolor and maybe doing a couple more layers in watercolor or adding some colored pencil. I didn't really know. I didn't really have a plan, and as Ben Franklin says, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail, and that is definitely true in this case. I used a mixture of yellows and greens to get some fresher, vibrant colors, but I just wasn't happy with the colors that I'm getting, and I think the reason is because I don't have the dark contrast in the back. I was also feeling that my composition was very uninteresting, so I started flicking on some paint thinking that would help my case. It really didn't make the background much more interesting, so I went ahead and dried my paper, and then I grabbed some colored pencils, and I thought maybe I could get a little more definition here in the piece. So I'm using Prismacolors. I'm using some purples, some dark purples, some light purples, some pinks, and I'm basically just trying to go in there and get some shadow and some highlight in where I feel like I've lost definition. There's a couple advantages about layering colored pencil over your regular sketch, over watercolor, and one of the advantages is that you can adjust your color tones, because colored pencils, wax-based colored pencils anyway, are a little translucent, meaning that you can actually lighten up a color that's a little too dark. You can also darken up a color that's too light, but you can still kind of see what's underneath, so it optically mixes, and then, you know, it doesn't feel like it's completely out of whack. You can also go over a little bit with the with watercolor after you've done the colored pencil, and I find that it seeps in and fills in any graininess, because the watercolor won't stick on top of the colored pencil, but it will seep around it and kind of fill in the grain. I was just bummed out about the background, so I just started putting more color in the background. At this point, I'm thinking I've got nothing to lose. This is not working. I'm just gonna see what I can make happen and experiment. I like it because like these colors flow really well. So I know if I flick water down and then I dab some colors into it, they will move really well. That's one of the things I like about the Jane Davenport paints. So I figured I would try that quality and see if I could use it to my advantage. At this point, I just decided I really need that dark background. It's not going to work without a dark background. I have nothing to lose, so I decided to use a mixture of burnt umber and Payne's Gray. At least that's what I'd call those colors. She might have a different name for them in her palette, but that's probably what the closest to a traditional watercolor would match up to. And I also used kind of like a hooker's green color in there. I needed to get some earthy darks in the background, and I was pleased as I was doing this, seeing that the spatters that I did before are actually showing up underneath that watery layer that I'm putting on top. So I am able to get kind of a dark inky color over what I was using before, like for spattering, and still get a little bit of that texture from the spatters. So that gave me a little encouragement, and then I started flicking on some of the lighter colors because I knew it would almost give me a starburst effect. And that got me thinking about one of my favorite techniques for texture, which is to use salt. I simply sprinkled on some table salt from the kitchen onto the really wet paper and then just let it dry and do its thing. I do let it dry normally when I'm doing the salt, just because it does seem to work better than trying to dry it with a hairdryer. And there you can see it dry, and I'm just scraping off the salt with a credit card scraper, just an old credit card, and then brushing off the crumbs with a soft brush. That gave me the texture and the interesting background that I wanted, so that hopefully my flowers could stand out a little bit more. But now everything is just too much the same value. So that's why my flowers aren't standing out. Everything just feels so mid-range and samey. So I figured if I grab my chalk pastels, I could bring those flowers up out, like forward a little bit, so they stood out. So I decided to start off with a pale lavender, and the pastels I'm using are not expensive. They're the just Faber-Castell Studio line, not their expensive line. Honestly, I find that as far as usability, these pastels work just as well as any of my expensive ones, but I think that they're probably made with less quality pigments. They're probably just made with cheap dyes, and they probably would fade over time. But this isn't a sketchbook, so I'm not really that worried. And I just think it's kind of fun to be able to adjust a little bit. So pastels are completely opaque. If they look transparent, it's because I'm only putting a little bit down and then I'm blending it. So when you really need to cover up a hot mess, a pastel is a fabulous tool for this. So I'm just trying to bring out my stems and my flowers. I still feel like they're a little too close in value, like the dark background should still be a little darker and the flowers should be a little bit lighter. But I'm going to work on the shadows on the flowers, like the darker purples, and then bringing out some brighter highlights in my flowers with pastels, so that they pop a little bit more. So I know I was going to need to get a little more detailed, so I'm using my pastel pencils. I'm using a combination of General's pastel pencils. That's what that one is there with the eraser on it. Those are super affordable, and I'll try to find a set to link up in the video description. And I think you can even get these at like Walmart and all your big box craft stores. They're a great value. These other ones I'm using I really like, however they're discontinued. They're by Royal Talons, the Van Gogh line. I don't know why. They used to have several different pencil lines, but they discontinued them a few years ago. But they were fantastic pencils, and they're my favorite pastel pencils probably, because I have a nice variety. I find them to be softer but easier to sharpen than like my Derwent ones, which were way more expensive. I can sharpen these in my electric pencil sharpener and they're fine. So in fact, they seem to work a little bit better than hand sharpening. But with the pastel pencils, I'm able to get the hint of having some veining in there and just those little slices of highlight that I was getting in my photograph. And I'll post that photo on my blog, thefrugalcrafter.wordpress.com, so you can see that, and you can download it if you want to try painting yourself. I highly recommend either bringing it up on a computer screen or downloading it. It's so hard, at least for me. Maybe for younger people with sharper vision, they can paint from their phone just fine, but if I need to get detail, I want to have the object with me, or I want a large printout, or I want to bring it up big on my computer screen where I can zoom in and stuff. So you do what's best for you, but for me that's a huge help. Just the fact that I can zoom in and look at it really closely. But I like that I can kind of skirt along the edges of those flowers. Even if I have pastel on the flower, I could catch the edge of the dry paper that doesn't have any pastel or colored pencil on it yet and grab that darker color. So for me, the pastel pencils kind of save the day here. When you're using pastel pencils and pastels, you'll want to know that pastel pencils are a bit harder than your traditional stick pastels. So that means that if you have the stick pastel down first, and that's a little softer, and you try to go over it with the harder pastel pencil, the pastel pencil is going to have a harder time to stick. It's kind of like the fat over lean rule, where you use thinner, leaner products underneath and you layer up the fat with the fatter products. It's the same thing with pastels, but it's almost like the soft over hard rule. So you'd want to put your pastel pencil or your Conte crayon or your new pastels that are harder, you'd want to put them down first and then put your softer pencils on top. Like the other day I did a live stream and I used Schmincke pastels for some highlights. Those are super soft. Those would be like the last things that you put on, but like new pastels, pastel pencils, those are the bitier, harder material you'd want underneath, because soft pastels will stick on top of pastel pencil, but pastel pencil's not really going to stick on top of soft pastel. You might get a little scrape here or there, but it's not going to stick that well. Now this technique here, I also felt like it saved my bacon. Taking this black pastel stick and just going next to some of my highlight flower areas and then smudging it out gave me that pop of contrast I needed so that this painting worked. Without that, I just didn't have enough contrast. And then I did allow some of the smudges to go off to the edge a little bit more, just to make it not feel so out of place. But that just tells you what values and contrast can do for a painting. So just by using that black stick, I save my blacks to the end, because I find that if I use them too early, I could just end up with a mucky mess. But if I have that to pull out of my hat at the end, I can really save a painting. And that is the process of this crazy Sketchbook Sunday painting. I know, what was I thinking, right? That's what I kept asking myself the entire time I was painting this. But in the end, it was kind of fun, and I think it might help you get out of some sticky situations in your sketchbook. I hope you enjoyed that, and if so, give me a thumbs up. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe if you want to get notified when I have a new video, and hit that bell while you're there. And until next time, happy crafting!